Hello, everybody, and welcome to Grimwit with Dimwits. I'm T.
And I'm Blondie, shaking my head like a little puppy.
Doing the puppy tilt.
I was doing the puppy tilt. Right? So did you make any New Year's resolutions this year, T?
I did. I think me and most of the world probably made the same one.
I can imagine. Let me guess. Has something to do with dieting and making yourself better for the new year.
It does have something to do with that. I mean, every year, we try to be a little healthier, a little bit more self-conscious after the holidays. I think most people are like that. But I actually have a pretty big birthday around the corner.
Ooh.
And I just want to be the best version of myself. And so I got to stop messing around, got to work on it, be healthier, be more mindful, and get my butt to the gym.
And what exactly happened a few minutes before we started recording?
That's not my fault. Okay. So it's not my fault. It's not my fault that we're here minding our own business, trying to be healthy, at least thinking about it. And my husband walks in and says, "Hey, do you want anything from the donut shop?" And let me just say, before I can even answer, Blondie puts in her order for an old fashioned and he starts to leave. I'm like, what the hell? What about me? Remember me?
He has his priorities. He knows what's more important.
He got a donut order and he was ready to take off. I was like, hello, cinnamon roll over here. Cinnamon roll.
He loves me.
Yeah, he does. And he loves to feed us. Every time you're around, he loves to go get us food. What is up with him?
He does. I don't know. Maybe he thinks that we can't run if we're heavy. I don't know.
Don't like that. Maybe he thinks that'll keep me put.
Maybe. If she can't get her fat butt off the couch, maybe she won't go anywhere.
Right. But anyway, so yeah, that's my resolution. And I am going to do starting tomorrow.
Famous last words.
Or no, better yet, starting Monday.
Of course, it's going to be Friday for 3.5 weeks.
Right. Are you like me where I do start every diet on Monday so I can get through the weekend? And by like Thursday, I've messed up. So then I got to mess up the weekend again and start on Monday again.
Exactly.
That happens 100 times throughout the year.
Okay, it's December. I got to get on this.
I know. But I give myself the leeway to play on the weekends because I already messed up for the week. So it's
That's right. That's right.
There's no point. Anyway, let's get off that subject. I'm feeling pudgier just talking about it.
And I think you have a cinnamon roll to eat while I talk.
I do. So I want you to talk so I can eat my cinnamon roll.
Ignore the chewing, people. Ignore it.
You know how I was going to say, you know how I roll, but you know how I cinnamon
roll.
Dad jokes all day. What is going to be your story for this week? It sounds kind of intense.
It is very intense and tragic. And I think a little, I don't want to say two-sided, but you can look at it at two different angles, I would say, because of the circumstances.
Okay.
So I'm going to say it. Let's get our grim on.
I'm going to keep my mouth shut because it's full of cinnamon roll right now.
And this is my story and you can't say nothing.
And I'm not going to even try to talk. I'm busy.
This week's episode is about a family and their teenage son, Scott Kologi, who killed 4 out of 7 family members on New Year's Eve in 2017. Scott had been diagnosed with autism. There is still a lot we don't understand about it, but we do want to talk about all aspects of this tragedy.
And did you feel that the autism played a part in this?
I think it did, just because certain aspects of what he did and how he did it were related to symptoms of that, and which I'll go into later.
Okay.
The year is 2017. The Kologi family from Long Branch, New Jersey, are familiar fixtures in their community. It is a smallerish community with just over 30,000 residents. Stephen Kologi, Scott's father, was 42 and a mailman. He grew up and lived in New Jersey most of his life. Linda was born in New Jersey and moved to Long Branch in 1992, where she met Stephen. They married in 1997. Stephen was well-liked, very nice, and a wonderful father. He was very active, enjoying bodybuilding, skiing, and softball. Linda was a very dedicated mother. Everything revolved around her family. Stephen and Linda had 3 children, Stephen Jr., Brittany, who was 18, and Scott, 16. There was another son from a previous relationship that did not live with the Kologis, but was still a close part of the family. Stephen Jr. was named after his father. Brittany was a college student planning to study health sciences. She was described as always smiling, making people laugh, artistic, and fun to be around. Scott had been diagnosed with autism and early stages of schizophrenia. Scott exhibited developmental issues, which caused him to be slower in his speech, learning, and social skills. To help these issues, he went to therapy at age 3. When he started attending school, he ended up falling behind, which caused him to be teased and made fun of.
Don't you hate that kids are so cruel?
Kids are mean.
They really are.
Stephen and Linda took him out of school and homeschooled him for a while, which helped. But eventually he ended up in a school that specialized in education for children with autism and other disabilities. At 16, Scott still slept in his parents' bed. He believed in Santa Claus, watched SpongeBob, which honestly I'm still a fan of.
Me too.
And his mother still laid out his clothes for him every day. His mother was very protective of Scott.
Wow, that's hard on the family. I mean, they have a big little kid, and to make him feel comfortable, I'm sure that it wasn't comfortable for the parents to have him in their bed while he was 16 years old.
Oh, I agree. Everything that I had seen on it, I do believe that she was just very protective of him, and she didn't mind.
Yeah, but you know how dads are. I mean, that's rough. And then he's not a baby at this point. He's got stuff going on too. So that's hard.
In an effort to understand more about autism and approach all sides of this episode, I looked up what autism is. Autism spectrum disorder is a complex, lifelong developmental condition that typically appears during early childhood and can impact a person's social skills, communication, relationships, and self-regulation. The autism experience is different for everyone. It is defined by a set of behaviors and is often referred to as a spectrum condition that affects people differently and to varying degrees.
Is that what spectrum condition means?
I think that it means there's just so many different parts to it, basing it on what I've read, that there is so many different parts. It affects everybody different ways.
It kind of sounded like that's what it meant. That's why I was asking. I was like, oh, didn't know that that's what it really meant.
From what I read, that's my interpretation.
Okay.
The range and severity of symptoms can vary widely. Common symptoms include difficulty with communication, difficulty with social interactions, obsessive interests, and repetitive behaviors. 1. Inappropriate social interaction, poor eye contact, compulsive behavior, impulsivity, repetitive movements, self-harm, and persistent repetition of words or actions. 2. Learning disability or speech delay in a child. 3. Intense interest in a limited number of things or problem paying attention. 4. Unaware of others' emotions or depression. And 5. Anxiety, change in voice, sensitivity to sound. While there is no known single cause of autism, early diagnosis helps a person receive resources that can help the choices and opportunities needed to live fully. We thought this information is important to know before going forward.
Yeah, I'm really glad you explained that because I have a nephew that's autistic, and I just know little things from being around him, but I really didn't understand what it meant, so I appreciate that.
Honestly, I didn't understand all the conditions or all the symptoms of it. So it's a learning experience.
Yeah, I think there's still a lot to learn about it.
Mm-hmm. The Kologis were a very tight-knit family, which was even easier to do with Adrian Kologi, Stephen Sr.'s father, living about 15 minutes from the rest of the family. Adrian, or Grandpa, had a longtime companion, also described as his soulmate, named Marianne Schultz. I love that they were in their 70s and they've been together so long that the Kologi kids called her Grandma.
Oh, I love old people love, they get their second chance or third chance or fifth chance, whatever it is, and they finally find their
And
person.
from what I understand, they were together for a very long time and there was no marriage or anything. I thought that was interesting.
That's unusual for people of their age.
Exactly. Living in sin. Ooh.
Ooh, I kind of like it.
Grandma had just retired. She worked as a human resource specialist and was said to be fun loving and a great multitasker. She loved to help younger generations. Also, part of the close family dynamic was Michelle, Scott's aunt. She rented a basement apartment of the family home with her husband. Stephen Sr. and Linda were amazing parents and did whatever they had to for their kids. Unfortunately, they had some serious financial troubles more than once. Years prior, they had to file bankruptcy. More recently, there was a chance their home would be foreclosed on.
Oh,
Stephen Sr. did what he had to do to support his family and keep things afloat. He worked a variety of odd jobs, sometimes working multiple jobs at once at all hours of the day and night. He never wanted his family to go without. There was always meals on the table.
I love that.
I do too. Very dedicated.
Yeah, I love that a man's willing to go out and work hard for his family. And I know that's old school because women could do the same thing, but I just love it.
The Kologi family all seemed to be happy, always smiling and having fun. They would go to the ball field to watch Stephen Sr. play softball or would have a family game night. They were all well known in the community and considered regulars in stores, picking up daily items, including Linda's lottery scratchers. I thought that was cute that Linda loved her scratchers. I think on some level, she was probably hoping to win millions of dollars for her family.
Well, I hope she didn't go too often. And that was the reason why her hubby had to go out and have multiple
I
jobs.
thought about that too. I wouldn't assume so.
It's like, slow your roll, Linda, slow your roll.
As time went on, Linda was pleased with the progress of Scott in his school, saying he was doing well and things seemed to be better. But that was only on the surface. Scott was having hallucinations and bad thoughts, which apparently wasn't new. He would get lost in his thoughts or what he was seeing, so much so he would have to be shaken to be snapped out of it. When Scott was about 15, he had asked his mother if he could go to therapy to talk about his hallucinations and thoughts, but his mother said no. She told him that if he talked about his thoughts, they'd take him away from her and put him in a loony bin.
Wow.
When I say bad thoughts, I mean Scott had been verbalizing how he wanted to kill his family. Conversations of what he had been thinking were overheard by Scott's aunt. She had brought it up to Linda, who told her, quote, "You never know what will happen if you say anything. Not only will you be put out, but you will never see my kids again," end quote. I kind of feel like Linda gaslit her a little.
She did. And it sounds like she was being, again, very protective, but it sounds like she knew there was a problem and she didn't want anyone outside of the house to know about it because of her fear, and I get that as a mom, but that's not healthy at all.
No, not at all. Scott's aunt actually felt that if she talked to anyone, that she would be without a home and her sister would never talk to her again.
Well, yeah, she threatened her. She said, if you say anything, you're out.
I don't think Linda understood what might happen to Scott if people knew what was actually going on with him.
She was scared, and obviously she's babying him and very protective of him. But, when people need help, they need help.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really sad that, she's not listening to
Right.
anybody.
No, I agree. In an effort to help, his aunt told Linda that maybe if Scott did seek therapy, they might provide medication for him to help him with his thoughts. Scott's response to that was, quote, "Maybe it will help me," end quote.
Wow, even Scott recognized that he needed help and was willing to
Mm-hmm.
do it. That says a
And
lot.
I don't know. I know he went into therapy when he was 3. I don't know how long he was in therapy and if it was for a period of time and he was old enough to understand, maybe he did realize it did help him before. But there were a lot of
Yeah.
circumstances
Yeah.
going on. So we weren't
Sounds
there.
like it.
We can't make judgment calls on it.
No, and it sounds like there was, like you said, so much going on that we're only getting a portion of
Mm-hmm.
the story.
It was a couple months before 2017 would come to a close. The family was playing a game of Clue. At one point during the game, Scott picked up the revolver piece, pointed it at his aunt and her husband, and told them he was going to kill them.
Did he say it jokingly or was he serious?
His aunt took it seriously.
Wow. That's frightening.
Again, Scott's aunt told Linda of Scott's behavior and told her she had to do something about it or something definitely would happen. Linda replied, "No, it's not," and brushed it off. After this, his aunt and her husband moved out.
Oh, wow. So it really did impact them. They were not
She was
playing.
scared. The aunt was scared.
Wow. Okay. That's saying a lot.
There were others that knew about Scott's homicidal thoughts. Grandpa was very close to Scott. He would go over to Grandpa's house and spend time with him. Scott felt very comfortable with his grandfather and started telling him about his bad thoughts and that sometimes they turn into urges. Worried, Grandpa talked to Stephen and Linda, telling them he talked about murdering the whole family. I'm unsure what their response was, but Grandpa was very scared by this.
So there's two family members who are trying to tell them, hey, you guys have a problem, and they're just choosing to ignore it. I mean, I'm not blaming them because, they're parents, and I get that, but
it's a
just
protective
so sad.
thing.
No, I understand that completely, but when something is this bad, this kid is this bad that he's scaring other family members, you should probably pay better attention, but I get it.
Scott started to develop an obsession with his brother Stephen Jr.'s AK-47 that he kept in his room.
Okay, hang on. They had an AK-47 at their house for real?
For real.
Oh my God. Okay, now that, it's irresponsible.
It is, and the aunt knew about that as well. I think that was another deciding factor for them to move.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Over the past year, Scott had taken it out and touched it several times, and even watched YouTube videos on how to use it. The family did have plans to get a case for the gun, I would imagine because everything that was going on with Scott, but hadn't done it at that point.
And do you know, did they keep it loaded? I mean,
I don't believe so. I don't believe so, just by how things went on farther in the story.
That's pretty irresponsible when you have, someone who's mentally challenged and then also talking about killing his family. How are you keeping any weapon? I mean, at that point, I'd put all the knives in the drawer away too. I mean, I'm not making fun of it. I'm being real. Like if I had someone who was talking about killing me or the family, I'd be like, oh, everything's got to go. Everything.
Oh, I agree. And or get help.
Both, maybe.
The holidays came, and no matter what their financial struggles were, Stephen and Linda always made Christmas a wonderful time for the kids. They would get presents for Scott and hide some of them in the attic with Santa tags on them to put out on Christmas Eve. New Year's Eve 2017 came, and the family always celebrated together. His sister was home from school, his brother's girlfriend came over, and they planned a wonderful day and evening celebration. During the day, Scott spent most of the time up in his room, which he later said he was researching the London massacre that had happened earlier that year. He had also looked up information to see if bullets from an AK-47 would go through a bulletproof vest.
Wow. And nobody's checking his internet history or anything like that?
No, I mean, that's a question you'd have to ask the family. That I don't know.
Well, I mean, maybe it's easier, from the outside looking in, but if I had someone talking about killing people, I'd be all up on that.
No, I agree. And you're right. We are on the outside looking in and looking at all the facts all in one lump instead of sporadic over a period of time.
Right. Well, I'm sure these things happen, in homes and people talk about it and nothing comes of it. So it's easy to blow it off. But this kid sounds like he was pretty consistently talking about this.
From what I can tell, he was. Midnight was approaching. The ball was about to drop in New York. Excitement filled the house. Scott came down for a little while, but went back up to his room. This time, he could feel the urges taking over, and he was going to prepare. Scott went into his brother's room, got the AK-47, magazines, and ammunition. He loaded 2 magazines, each with 30 bullets. He was very nervous because he knew the difference between right and wrong, he later told the police. Scott then put on his leather jacket and sunglasses, which were part of a Terminator costume that he had worn. He also put in earbuds to protect his ears from the shooting sounds. He turned out the light in his room and just waited.
with all that preparation, that's quite a few things. I mean, he did a couple of things I wouldn't have thought about. And it doesn't sound to me like he's mentally incapable of, well, like he said, knowing the difference between right and wrong. And this is just something he wanted to do. This is really scary.
And I don't want to say it's from his autism, but in all of these symptoms that we did read, that they pick something and they obsess over it.
But he gets it. I mean, he's understanding consequences even to himself while doing it. So that's why I'm like, what's the word I'm looking for? He can figure things out. He does understand. He can see the big picture is what I'm trying to say.
He can differentiate between what he should and shouldn't do.
Well, and he's also seeing the repercussions by preparing himself. So that's a lot of thought processing. So anyway, I'm listening and I'm going, wow, he doesn't sound like he was too challenged in that regard.
Not in that regard, but I mean, maybe that's part of it.
Yep, they can be very organized. You're right.
At around 11:45, Linda headed upstairs with New Year's Eve party favors to hopefully coax Scott out of his room to come downstairs and celebrate. She opened the door to a dark room, and as soon as there was light, Scott began to fire at his mother. He aimed at her chest and continued to fire, shooting her 4 times. He wanted the room to be dark because he didn't want anyone to see him. He also knew it would probably be his mother that came up, and he didn't want to see her face because that may have brought him out of his daze when he shot her.
Wow.
Hearing the shooting, Stephen Sr. ran up the stairs to protect his wife and son from whatever was going on. Scott came out of his room and shot his father. Stephen fell to the steps. Scott walked over his body and headed downstairs where the rest of the family was. Everyone had already scattered, most running into the kitchen. His brother's girlfriend, his sister, his grandfather and grandmother. His brother was able to escape out the front door. Scott made his way downstairs and into the kitchen. His brother's girlfriend had hid behind the refrigerator, which actually I found very impressive by itself. Who can get behind the refrigerator?
Especially in a heartbeat like that. I mean, wow.
She called 911, telling them that there was someone shooting in the house that she was in. They were asking her questions, but she whispered, "They are still shooting," and to hurry up. Reaching the kitchen, Scott shot his grandmother in the chest. She fell to the ground. He then turned his attention to his sister, who he didn't like, sitting at the table. He shot her in the head, face, and chest. Grandpa was on his knees at Grandma's side in disbelief and terror. Scott looked at his grandfather on the ground, holding the love of his life, and he said he snapped out of it. He laid the rifle on the table, went upstairs, and waited for the police.
Wow. The way you describe this whole scene is just really, really sad.
Completely can picture what exactly is going on.
Me too. You've laid out a really good picture of it, and it's really, it's very, very sad.
In total, there were 14 shots fired, with 12 hitting the victims. The only survivors were his brother, his brother's girlfriend, and Grandpa. During an interview, he said that he kept shooting until they stopped moving because he didn't want them to be in pain, that he definitely was going to kill his mother, but that he had to kill his father because he would be sad without her.
So see, when he says he didn't want them to be in pain, how does he not think that shooting them creates the pain? Like, how does it not stop there? You know what I mean?
He has the empathy knowing that they are in pain being shot. But I can't answer that question. I don't know.
It's just a comment really, but it's
thinking out loud.
Wow. Thinking out loud, like, okay, you don't want them, like it's important to you that they're not in pain, but yet you're going to create the pain they're about to be in. I know it doesn't make sense, but
No, I get it. I understand. In the hopes the New Year's would mask the sound of gunfire, Scott had waited till midnight or close to it to begin slaughtering his family. The neighbors heard the shots, but did actually believe they were fireworks, with one exception. A neighbor had looked out their window and saw flashes in the Kologi home and realized it wasn't fireworks. Shortly thereafter, a line of police cars had swarmed around the home.
So I find that interesting that he waited till New Year's to mask the sounds of the gunfire. Did he ever say that he thought he was going to get away with it?
No, because he went upstairs to wait for the police. The new year, 2018, was started with Scott being taken into custody, where he would be interviewed. Stephen Jr. went with him as his guardian. Now, that honestly must have been tough, and let me preface this by saying this is just my opinion. First, I think Stephen was extremely strong to go with his brother after what he'd witnessed. But second, I kind of have to wonder if Stephen didn't have some guilt because it was his gun. I don't know. I didn't see anything about that. This is just me just thinking out loud.
No, your thoughts are, I think everybody would think that too. I mean, he's 16, but he obviously isn't in control of himself, his emotions, anything like that. He needs guidance, and for his brother to be, gosh, a bigger person than I ever would be and step in after he killed our parents, and grandmother and went after everybody else. That says a lot about Stephen. But yeah, there may have been some guilt about the gun too, because without that gun, none of this would have happened.
Well, that seems like one of a few factors that came into play here. Grandpa did go to the police station, which actually was the last time he ever saw Scott. Scott had seen his grandfather and yelled, "I love you, Grandpa," but he didn't turn around. He just kept walking.
Oh, that just breaks my heart for Grandpa. Can you just imagine what he's thinking and how he's feeling? And
you have the love of his life, his son, his wife, his granddaughter, all in a matter of minutes, I'm assuming, gone.
Moments, yeah, just moments gone. And everybody catered to this kid, and everybody, didn't think it was an issue. And Grandpa's just like, I'm done. I can't do this anymore.
Makes you wonder in the back of his mind going, we told you.
All the woulda, shoulda, couldas, I'm sure, are just playing over and over and over again in his mind.
Exactly.
But it's not his fault.
No, not at all.
It's only Scott's fault. But yeah, all the things that could have happened, that should have happened, that, all the maybes.
I saw part of the interview, and Scott seemed to be very calm and actually confident in his answers. Stephen sat silent, would look away, and you could see the anguish in his face. During the interview, Scott was taken to the restroom at one point, and you see Stephen break down and throw something across the table. He was keeping it together for his brother.
Man, that's dedication.
Scott had said that he knew they were all deceased, but that he didn't feel like he was physically there. When questioned about how many times he thought he shot everyone and where on their body, he went person by person explaining he shot his mother about 5 to 7 times in her torso and chest. His father came upstairs, then he shot him in the back, then went downstairs, shot his sister 3 times, and motioned to around the head and chest area because she was sitting down. Then said, "Yeah, I shot Grandma 4 times in the chest region." Scott explains that because he had the things, meaning the earbuds, in his ears, everything was muffled, and that he wasn't fully there. He felt like he was watching a movie.
Jeez. In a moment like that, to be able to go back and talk about not only where you shot people, so he just didn't shoot. I mean, he was aiming. How many times he shot them, each person, that's saying a lot. And he knew what he was doing.
He was off on a few, and I think he was saying that because he had the earbuds in. It's tough.
It's not something we'll ever understand.
The investigators asked him if he knew what he was doing. He replied, yeah. Questioned him about the time all of this happened, and he thought it was around 11:58, 11:59. Police officers confirmed with him that his intention was to do it around midnight because of all the New Year's celebrations outside. Lastly, Scott was asked when or how long he thought of doing this. He replied that he had been thinking about it all day. Wow. The town of Long Branch was shocked. Everyone that knew Scott had said he was always happy with a smile on his face, that this came out of the blue and he wasn't a violent kid. Days after the shooting spree, the funerals were held. There were hundreds of people lined up outside the church to pay their respects. The Kologis had one funeral for his father, mother, and sister. Stephen Jr. was not able to give the eulogy. This I completely understand, so the Reverend had to give it.
Can't even fathom burying 3 family members at one time.
Exactly. And I did see pictures of all 3 caskets lined up side by side. It was very sad. Grandma's family had a separate service for her, where more than 200 people came to pay their respects. Scott was arrested and put in jail. In the beginning, he was charged as a juvenile. For the next year, Scott's attorneys tried to get the court to agree to put him in a psychiatric facility while awaiting trial, but the judge said no, that he would remain in jail until the time of trial. The judge also changed the capacity in how he would be tried and stated that he would be tried as an adult.
Wow.
That was a big statement.
That's a big statement. He was only 16 at the time and he was mentally challenged. So, wow, the circumstances in this case must have really changed that up.
At one time, there was a question whether or not the tape of Scott's interview would be thrown out. Of course, the prosecution wanted to keep it in because it was his confession. The defense claimed that Scott was 16 years old and had the mental capacity of someone much younger, so he couldn't consent to the interview. He did have his adult brother there as his guardian, and the tape was left in as part of evidence. The defense attorneys were going for an insanity plea and argued that Scott had finally lost it, and I quote, was legally insane and experiencing a severe psychotic episode after suffering for years with mental illness for which he was never treated. They brought up the fact that he had uncontrollable thoughts, homicidal thoughts, that went ignored and untreated, that he had asked for help. The psychiatric experts for the defense explained that Scott had a mental break, that he suffered from schizophrenia and was in a disassociated state during the murders. However, the prosecution did not believe that. They argued that Scott knew what he was doing. The prosecution had a world-renowned psychiatric expert, Dr. Dietz, who, you might find this interesting to know, also worked on the Jeffrey Dahmer case.
I thought that name sounded familiar.
Dr. Dietz disagreed with the defense's expert's evaluation, starting with Scott was asked during his interview if he heard voices telling him to kill his family. Scott said no. That he had the forethought to wear earplugs, someone suffering from a break wouldn't have the presence of mind to do that. Followed with the videos he watched, showing how to load and use the rifle and looking to see if bullets would go through a bulletproof vest that police officers would be wearing.
I can't help but agree with this. I mean, it's really sad, but I fully agree. He planned it. It was not a psychotic break from what it sounds like. This is all planned, and he just went through with his plan.
Well, I know one of the symptoms is obsessive interests. So once they get focused in on something, that they obsess about it. When he was telling his grandfather about his thoughts, his grandfather said, well, distract yourself, go take a shower, go find something else to do, which I kind of thought was interesting, that he's trying to get him to focus on something else.
And I find that interesting because here you have all these people who are telling him what to do or ignoring what he's doing, and none of them are qualified or have been educated, it sounds like, on what they should be doing because they're all just ignoring it. So blowing it off or telling him to go take a shower, none of those things helped. And I'm really hoping that what the listeners are getting from this is that, you know, we need to pay attention. We need to pay attention to these signs.
No, we do. Absolutely. And we've had other discussions and other podcasts about mental health and how important it is.
Yeah.
And another thing that I want to say, this was 2017. So it's not like it was in the 80s where mental health, not that it wasn't important in the 80s, but it's just more prevalent now. And it's more, you have more access to help for it.
To help. I agree. Back then, you know, everybody was kind of thrown into one boat, and now everybody, you know, diseases and mental illnesses have kind of been separated, and you can treat those things.
You can get help so much easier.
Exactly. Exactly.
The case went to the jury, and after deliberating for less than 5 hours, Scott Kologi was found guilty of murdering 4 members of his family. He was sentenced to 150 years in prison. He will be eligible for parole after he served 127 and a half years.
Wow.
Now, I have a lot of thoughts on this whole tragedy. Some of we've already discussed, and I don't want to be disrespectful. I'm going to try and be as respectful as possible. But
Of
but
course.
I was curious, so I did look it up that it is illegal to own an assault weapon with large capacity ammunition in New Jersey now and also in 2017. And I know they talked about getting a case, and I'm assuming it would be a locked one for the rifle, but they didn't. But then that also brings up how come they didn't hide the magazines and ammunition, lock them up somewhere else? I mean, I really think this is a big reminder of gun safety in the home.
Yeah, because they were too lax about it. I mean, they were acting like, well, everybody in this home is old enough to know better, but they had the one kid who you couldn't assume, and he was actually speaking about killing people and taking a little toy token revolver and pointing it at people and talking about killing his family. I think that even if you made that assumption thinking, well, everybody in this house knows better, once anybody in the family, doesn't matter who it is, starts talking about killing people, you take everything out, or you at least lock it up in a manner that they can't get to it, because now
It's too
it's
accessible.
it's too accessible for that. What if you really did have a psychotic break, which I'm not quite sure in this situation is what it was, but even sadder, this was
Mm-hmm.
planned, and he knew exactly what he was going to do because that gun was available to him, not locked up, ammunition not put somewhere else. You know, you, you got to be responsible when you have something like this going on in your home, when you have someone who you cannot predict what their actions are going to be, for the
Right.
most part.
No, I agree fully. And like we've said throughout this, we don't know their situation at the time. We don't know, and and how long of a period of time. And if he did bring it up, again, this is condensed, maybe over a year, maybe he said it 2 or 3 times, and it just kind of got, like they said, they just blew it off. And we will never know.
There's going to be a lot of things we don't know about in this case. But one thing I do know is that you don't need an AK-47 in your home. You
I would,
don't. If you have one and there's, a husband and a wife and, whatever, they both know how to use it, that's different. If you've got kids, if you got people going through stuff, and if you got anyone at any age with a mental disability, you should not have that gun in your home. That's
I
irresponsible.
agree. I agree. And I'm not victim blaming or implying it's anyone's fault. But you have to wonder if he would have gotten the help that he asked for, if things would have turned out differently. And for whatever reason, his mother didn't get him any. We won't ever know. We just talked about we won't ever know their situation. And maybe it could have been financially, or she was protective of Scott and thought he'd be taken away from her. She was just in denial.
Yeah, she
At one
was.
point, his mother said to him, "You wouldn't hurt me." And he replied, quote, "I have to. And then Dad next, because he would be sad without you. His sister would have to die because he hated her, and his brother, too, because he would be left with no parents." End quote.
I, even as a mother in denial, how do you not hear these words? And you've given him access to weapons in your home. You can do one, but you can't do the other. You know what I mean? If you're going to ignore the words, and you can't have it both ways. You can't have the person saying why he's going to kill everybody in his family and then keeping a gun available for him to do
Mm-hmm.
so. It's too much. People have to pay attention. You cannot be in denial about certain things, because not only did mom take her own life in her hands, she took everybody in her family's life in her hands by ignoring that. And that is irresponsible. And I know she's gone, and it's all very tragic. But, we're telling the story so people will hear that, these situations don't always turn out right because people just don't pay
Mm-hmm.
attention.
I understand. I understand what you're saying. He asked for help, but he did have the whole plan already laid out. So whether it is due to his autism, which is referred to as a spectrum condition for a reason, everyone's symptoms are different, or whether due to possible schizophrenia that some sources claimed ran in his family on his father's side. We wanted to finish this episode with a few words from Scott Kologi Jr. about his parents. They were the greatest parents he could have asked for. He said about his family, "I just wish I could tell them all how much they meant to me and how much I truly loved each and every one of them, because I didn't do that enough." And lastly, as a general thought, he said, "To give the ones you love an extra kiss or I love you."
Wow. That is so sad because the writing was on the wall and everybody just chose not to read it. Man, what a way to start the new year. Thanks, Blondie. That's a lot to think about right there. You packed a lot into this story.
Yeah, and I think the bottom line just is just be aware of not only your family, but be aware of friends, associates, and what's going on with them. Just be aware.
Be aware and pay attention. If a loved one comes to you with concerns, pay attention. You don't want to have a story like this because you didn't pay attention. We want to thank you all for listening. Have fun, take care, and let your imaginations run wild.
Bye.
Bye-bye. We just want to thank you all for sharing your time with us. And if you'd like to send in your creepy little grim bits, we would love to hear your personal stories, interests, and suggestions. Please email them to grimwitwithdimwits@gmail.com. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram at grimwitwithdimwits, Twitter at grimwitwithdimwits, and Facebook, Grimwit with Dimwits. Join us every Monday for new episodes, and feel free to share us with your grim-loving friends.
We would really appreciate if you would take a minute to rate and review. 5-star ratings go a long way and would really help us out. Until then, we would love it if you'd come back next week to delve with us into the strange and unusual things we just can't wrap our skulls around.